Hello folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm James, continuing on with my build of this Aeromite RC plane. Like I mentioned in all my introduction videos in this build series, this is a plane I'm building off of a set of plans. Can't get this plane in a kit, you can't purchase this plane in a kit. If you want to build it, you need to build it off a set of plans. And in the introduction video for this play series, check out the introduction video. I talk about a few different ways to get a set of plans so you can build it as well if you're interested. So in this video I'm going to be installing or basically hinging the control surfaces. I have the ailerons, I have the elevator, and I have the rudder here, and I'm going to be using CA hinges, which I have right here. And in addition to that, as part of the aileron installation, I also need to install these hookups for the ailerons. It's just sort of call them a strip aileron horn set, and I'll talk about these in just a few minutes here. And then of course I have my CA hinges also, and I'm also going to be using just some Zap thin CA. Any thin CA will work. I just have some Zap here that I purchased. So to start with, let's just go ahead and take a look at our CA hinge material, or our CA hinges. I have a couple little sets in here. And you know, the interesting thing is that these are actually just a no-name, sort of come from the hobby shop that I go to a lot. It's just their sort of little brand name that they have. And again, it's just a little pack of small CA hinges. And then I also have this pack here. This is from Brodick. And you know, you can get these, I think Dubro has them, Solar, you know, all kinds of hobby suppliers supply CA hinges. They shouldn't be very hard to find. And they come in different sizes. And of course you can also get the bigger sheets of the material, just basically a fiberglass material, fiberglass sheeting material that you can cut your own, which I generally like to do, but I decided to go ahead and buy a couple sets of these smaller ones. So again, they're nothing special. There's 10 in this one, I think, and this one there's 24 in this one. So yeah, I'll probably just end up using this pack here to start with, and then we'll go from there. So you know what you need to do this for your CA hinges is you need your, of course, you need your CA hinge material here, and then you also need a sharp knife like this. X-Acto is perfect for this. Just gotta be very careful. You need a sharp blade like that, and then of course you need your CA, your thin CA glue. You need thin CA because the way the glue gets down inside there, once you slot the control surface, you're going to slide your hinge into that slot that you made, and it's a very relatively tight fit, and you need something thin enough to kind of wick the glue down inside of there. You can't use a thick CA or a thicker glue. So let's go ahead and open up one of these. I'm just going to go ahead and be careful, and I don't want to cut my finger. Pull some of these out. So you can see they look sort of like a little wafer. It's just basically a cloth. It's just a fiberglass cloth. And typically I like to cut the corners off. When you slot it and you're trying to get it into the slot, you'll see the corners can sometimes kind of get caught up on that. So out of convenience, I like to sort of go ahead and trim the little corners off, which is easy enough to do with a pair of scissors. Just pop them off like this. And that tends to be pretty helpful in getting them to slide in once you have the slot established. Alright, so the other thing we need are some pins. These are some T-pins here. And the reason you use these, or how you use these, is you find the center of your CA hinge and you pop this guy in there like this. And then you'll see when we slide it into the control surface, that pin allows you to line it up, basically kind of center it so you don't go in too far. And then it also, when you put the other one on this side, when you add the other control surface in like this, what that does is that pin leaves a little bit of a gap, and that little bit of gap is what's needed to kind of help. If I had two pieces like this, you get a little bit of a gap like that, and then that allows the hinge to be able to rotate more freely. If it was right up against it, it could still work, but you don't want it to bind up or anything like that. So you use the pin to help center the hinge and also to create a little gap for you. Then you just pull it out when you're finished. So let me go ahead and set this CA hinges off to the side here for a second here, and I want to talk briefly about our strip aileron linkage setups, which I have two packs here. These are smaller sizes. These are this is basically a 1/2 A size here. This one doesn't give a size, it's just a little bit smaller. And of course they make these for different size airplanes. And they're actually pretty simple. I'm going to actually end up using this one here that I have. This is actually an older brand, Hobby Shack. Wow, that's been sitting around for a long time. I did get this at my local hobby shop. You know, they have all kinds of stuff still left over from the old days, if you will. You know, Dubrow, you can get some of these off the Dubrow's website and other places. So let me go ahead and pull this out of here, and we'll take a quick look at it. All right, so here's a little picture diagram of the way it looks. And as you can see, it's just the one wire, and it's already pre-bent. It kind of makes this angle, this 90 degree, comes back and it goes up. And this is where this little control horn on here, or this little connection here, that's what hooks up to your aileron linkage here. And as you can see, you have this sort of hinge. It's not really a hinge, it's basically just something that holds this piece in. And you just slide that into the control, into the wing itself. And then this piece here is going to plug into the aileron. All right, so just in case some of that wasn't clear, I thought maybe I'd just show you again here how they're gonna go in. So again, this little guy here is gonna plug into the wing, and it'll be set up, it'll plug in like this, if you can imagine it going into the wing like that. And then do the same thing for the opposite one. It'll go in here like this. Those are gonna be plugged into the wing. And then we have our two little pieces sticking out. And then the aileron we'll drill a small little hole in the aileron, and this will just, then the aileron will just plug into that like this and like this here. And then that's how it will be set up. Of course, we'll have our CA hinges holding the ailerons on as well. So then when we move, when the aileron servo is moving, it's engaging these little control horns on here, and then we're moving, rotating the ailerons. So that's that, and we'll come back to the aileron setup. We'll do that last. I think I'm going to go ahead and start, just to kind of make things easy. I'll start with the tail section, and we'll do the elevator and the rudder to get us going, and then we'll come back and finish up with the ailerons. Well, as I was looking at my CA hinge that I have here, I think these are actually going to be a little bit too big for the elevator here and even the rudder. These are relatively, probably don't need to be that big. They would work, but I can always trim them, obviously. So what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and use this little smaller set that I have here from the other set that I have. And I'll use those, and I think that'll be a little bit better. I don't need to overdo it with this. And you know, CA hinges are actually very strong, especially on smaller planes like this. So let me go ahead and pull these guys out of here, and then we'll set up to do, we'll start with the elevator, because the elevator has to go on first. The reason that is because the rudder is going to slip on top of that. So we can't do this one first, we won't be able to get the elevator in there. So things like that we have to watch out for. Then as mentioned, I'm going to go ahead and trim off the corners here of each one. And you know, like I mentioned, you don't have to do this. I just find it to be a little bit more user-friendly by doing this. So now I have all my little hinges prepared, cut off the corners, and now I can go ahead and put all my little pins in right in the center. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can just eyeball that if you're comfortable doing it. Just kind of pop this guy in there like I showed you before. So I'll do this with all the hinges. All right, all those are done, and then as I mentioned, this is going to go just like this now, and that little pin is going to help keep it centered and also give us that gap. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use 4 hinges for the elevator. I'm going to do 1 on the outside, 1 on the inside, 2 on each side, and then I'm going to do 3 for the rudder. You know, this is basically, I'm just eyeballing it. I'm just kind of making a judgment call, and I'm not going to do any special measurement. I'll probably put 1 here in the middle, down here, and I'll do 1 up here, sort of kind of like right down here toward the bottom of the fin, and then 1 up here toward the top. Okay, so for the elevator, I'm going to start with this one, and I'm just going to come in about 1 inch from the tip like this, and just mark just kind of about 1 inch right here. That'll be that one, and again on this side over here on the other side, about 1 inch again. That'll be about the center of the hinge. And then in the center here, I have this harder piece of wood in here, and I want to avoid that. I think it's about right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put my hinge probably, I can kind of feel where that is in there. And these hinges are about man, they're about 3/4 of an inch wide. So I'll just go an inch from there as well, right about there. And again, I can feel that little spot, and I can actually even see where that little piece ends beneath the monocoque. So right about here. So those are going to be my locations, the center of the hinges. And then one thing I did note is that the hinge is still pretty big, and the tip of the elevator here is kind of thins out. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim a little bit of this off to make it a little bit of a shorter hinge. I don't want to split all the way through. I don't think that's necessary. All right, so now we just want to be very careful. And again, this is actually a pretty thin piece of wood here, and it is going to split, you know, a little bit as I do this, as I put the X-Acto blade in. But the nice thing again about the CA, it's thin, it's going to go in there, it's going to heal anything that we do here. So it's not, don't worry too much about that. If you get a little bit of splitting, the CA will fix that. So here I have my hinge. I'm going to line it up on my approximately where my little mark is there, and then take my X-Acto. And what I'm going to do is I like to go in, this is just the way I do it, this is no rule or anything, but I like to take my blade, and you have the straight side and you have sort of the angled part, right? So they'll call this the angled where the actual blade is. I like to go straight in. I just like to I like to push this straight in and sort of establish one side, and then I go flip it and I like to establish the other side, and that just sort of gives me my limits. And then what I'll do is I'll just join them. I'll just work and I'll just connect those two initial incisions, if you will. So I'm going to right about here, and again, I'm going to be very careful. Do not want to cut myself. Right about there. That'll be the first one. Really got to be careful with this. Looks a little awkward because I'm doing it on the camera here. Again, I'll put this guy back here, and of course you can mark the limits of your hinge also. You know, you put a little mark on here. You can always get that mark off with a little bit of alcohol, like I mentioned before, some other cleaning fluid. So there's the other one right there. And you want to be very careful and make sure you go in straight. Take your time. Kind of join these guys up here. Like I said, it's going to split. Something this thin is going to have a tendency to split. But we just got to be careful. Then I just use my blade as sort of a measuring, kind of like a little measuring device. I'll figure out how far I need to go. Looks like I need to go about halfway in with my blade. So again, be very careful right about there. And I'll try to bring it to the other side. You need that sharp blade because you need to be able to get this in there and work it. And you don't want to put too much pressure on it. You want that blade to be sharp, so you don't have to put a lot of pressure. And then you kind of join it and just kind of work it across and be very careful. So something like that. Now we're going to go ahead and slide our CA hinge in there, hopefully. And there we go. So there is the first one. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do this on each one of these. I'll take one more here. We'll just do one more. And we'll go ahead and we'll mark it here. I'll put a little bit of a mark on both sides so I can see it. Do the same thing here, being very careful. Get that first cut in. Get my second cut in. I know you can't see that. Here we go. Again, super, super careful. So once I get that established, I have this other side, and now I'll just try to work it across, kind of drag it, work it through, and connect it here. There it goes, like that. Again, being very careful with this. And I also want to make sure, again, I got the depth. I think I do. There we go. And now we'll pop this other guy in here. There we go. Just like that. So let me go ahead and I'll put these other two on, and then we'll come back and we'll do the same. We'll hook it up onto the horizontal stabilizer. Now this will go just like this. So now what I'm going to do is mark the limits of my hinges now on the horizontal stabilizer. And again, you don't want to make it exact, right? You want to go a little bit beyond the width of the hinge, because you may need to move your, whatever you're doing, you may need to move your control surface, you know, a little bit this way or that way to get it all lined up. So what you want to do is give yourself a little bit of room to work with by making them a little bit wider. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just mark these off. And just a small dot. And now what I'll do is I'll slot these just like I slotted these ones. Again, being super careful, cutting away from yourself as much as possible, taking your time. It's so much harder to do this when you're doing it on a video, I'll tell you that much. There. Careful. Like I said, don't worry if you hear a little snap here and there, if you're kind of splitting it a little bit. Doesn't matter, as long as you soak it with that CA when you put the hinge in, it's all going to get healed. Okay. All right, so let me go ahead and do the rest of these, and we'll come back and we'll pop this guy on. All right, so let's go ahead and see if this will fit on here now. Slide them in. It's always a little tricky to get these in because you're putting them all in at one time, and it's hard to get everything lined up to go in at once, but once you get it going, it should slide in. This guy's being tricky out here. I think I have to fix that up a little bit. I think I'm gonna have to clean that out a little better. Hold on. That guy's being a troublemaker. There it goes. There we go. That one was being a little problematic. Pull this up here. Okay, and there we go. So you can see here, now I can kind of line it up, but it looks good. All right, so let's get the CA glue and we'll get those glued in there. So at this point, you could leave the pins in if you wanted. They'll still come out after you glue it with the CA, but I'm going to pull them out and just be careful not to move anything. But yeah, either way generally works. So again, I have my thin CA. This is just Zap. And what I want to do is, it's hard to really tell. You just want to make sure you get some in there. I would say like maybe 4 or 5 drops or so. You want it to go into the hinge as much as possible. Sometimes it's hard to judge that. So I'm just going to go ahead and hold it up on here and put some drops in. It'll get in there. Again, you're relying on that wicking action from the CA hinge itself to kind of draw that stuff in. Yeah, 3 or 4 on each side, something like that. I'll let it sit for a second or two, and then what's going to happen, you're going to have to sort of work it after it cures. You're going to have to sort of work it to loosen it up a little bit here. It's going to be pretty stiff once you get it in there for the first time, but you just have to work it. So let that sit for a minute or two, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. It's still stiff. It's going to be stiff, and like I said, you're just going to have to work with it, and it'll loosen up over time, but just got to work with it and kind of be careful. All right, so now this is finished for the elevator, and I can move on to the rudder. Okay, well, here as you can see, we have the elevator and the rudder installed. And again, they're a little stiff. I'll have to kind of work those out a little bit. And I do have some cleanup. I have a little bit of ink on here and stuff. And then we'll go back with our iron. You know, the whole process is a little bit, you know, it's a little bit destructive, you know, because you're cutting and you're kind of getting in here and you're hearing little pops and splits. Sometimes it kind of makes you feel a little, gets you a little unnerved. But, you know, don't worry about that. As long as you do it, kind of take your time and use the CA, it's all going to be nice and strong. So, all right, so this is finished, and we will now move on to the ailerons. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the ailerons. Now, the hinges are going to be pretty simple, just like I did in the tail section there, no big deal there. But it's going to be a little bit tricky with these aileron linkages. And the reason that is I was looking at this, is because it's such a tight fit. So if you look back in here, if you can kind of see in the back of that bulkhead right there, a while back we slotted those two slots in there to accommodate the movement of the aileron control linkage. So what I did here obviously is I marked on the fuselage where those slots were or are, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to mark where those are on the wing. I want to make sure I'm lined up, so let me grab my wing bolt. That's right in location. And I'll go ahead and mark those two spots right there on the wing. So now what we're going to do is we'll just put our kind of the approximate location of where this linkage is going to be. So again, it's got to come out to here, because that's going to be, again, it's going to be inside the fuselage. And then we want this sort of hinge part that's going to hold it on to be sort of in the center, sort of like that. Okay, hopefully you can see that. And I'm just going to go ahead and put two little dots sort of like on the outside of where this hinge is going to go. I'm calling it a hinge, even though it really sort of more just like a rotating point. I don't know what to call it, but so it's going to go in there just like this. And now we're going to slot this out like we did with the CA hinges. It's going to have to be a little bit wider slot because this is a nylon piece here and it's a little thicker. So we'll have to slot that out. And then when we slot that out, we'll go from there, kind of get it going. And then as we go and set it down on here, I will then sort of create a little channel for this piece to be able to rotate within. Okay, hopefully that made sense. Let's give it a try. Okay, so now you can see this is in here now, kind of a trial run. That's a pretty big piece right there. I think I'm going to go ahead and, this plane's kind of small, I'm going to go ahead and actually kind of try to get it in there a little bit further. I'm going to go ahead and sort of make a little bit of a channel in here to kind of get this right up against it. So let me pull this out of here. Okay, well, that's a little bit better, but still not good enough. I want to get that a little bit closer. So I'm going to go ahead and cut a little piece out here, obviously, and then I'm also going to maybe do a little bit of a channel cut so for this end right here, so that I can get that nice and close and in there. And then, because I have to think about the fact that the aileron is going to be on top of this, and I don't want a gap there. I want to be careful about that. So just to get just kind of get the best fit I can. So let me do a little bit more cut in here, but I think we're close. Okay, well, I think I got this pretty darn close to where I need it to be. So as you can see, I kind of recessed this little hinge point down inside the wing a little further, and then I brought sort of that axis of this piece right here sort of flush with the wing a little bit inside of it, and then we're a little bit on the inside of our wing now, which is good. I may need to make a little bit of room over here on this side of the fuselage, like right back in here. I may need to do a little bit of trimming in there. And then, of course, we'll clean it all up. Right now, it's a rough cut, but I think that is pretty much going to be good enough like that, and that should work. Okay, so off camera, I did this one right here, and I also shortened the control horns, or the control rod that was coming off of these. They were actually pretty long, and I did a little test fit on there, and I'll show you just a minute here, but they were sort of getting in the way, and they actually didn't need to be as long as they were anyhow. So I got these both on here, and again, it looks a little bit ugly because I had to make some cuts and such, but we'll clean that up. We'll spend a little bit of time cleaning that up later, but right now we're just trying to get the fit to be right. So let me go ahead and I'll show you how this works. Let me go ahead and move the camera. There we go. And again, I have to kind of clear these little slots that I cut out back in there, and these are going to go on like this. Such a small plane, it's very delicate. And then these guys, you can see, I can move them around a little bit to kind of get them in the right spot. There we go, like that. I probably will have to do a little bit of work maybe in here. I don't know, it looks like it's actually pretty good. But so now what I'm going to do is I got to figure out, you know, I'll just feel it to where I know that it's in the right location, and then we'll mark it on here in the right location so it doesn't move. And then when we come back and we put our ailerons on, we'll make sure that we plug it into the right location. So I just have to mark those locales. You notice I've been using this blue tape to sort of put on here, so when I mark, I'm kind of tired of, I use the ink, the Sharpie on the plane, but then I have to clean it off. So I'm going to try to do this, make it a little bit easier on me. Okay, so let's go ahead and mark this one first. So I just got to make sure it can move all the way, has free movement here, as you can see here. So it goes all the way here, like that's not getting caught up anywhere. So I'm just going to want to mark this. So I can go all the way down and then come all the way back. Okay. All right, great. So before I glue this on, I'm going to take a little bit of petroleum jelly, this stuff right here, and put a little bit of it on this wire here like this. And that way we don't get any, or if we do get any epoxy along that little hinge location, help prevent it getting down inside there and gluing the hinge or that little rotating wire in place. We don't want that to happen. Okay, so let me put a little bit of this on here, and then we can go ahead and glue this in. I'm going to be using just this JB Weld 5-minute epoxy. I like to use this stuff, works pretty good. Okay, so I let this cure, and now it's glued in there nicely, and it's nice and strong for both sides here. Now we can move on to our aileron, connect our aileron to this. So, as I mentioned, I'm gonna line it up in the right location and drill out a little, get my pin vise with a little drill bit and basically drill the same diameter for this piece here. We'll plug this in, and of course we'll do our CA hinges as well. So I want to be extra careful now because I know that I don't have a lot of leeway here. I got to get this lined up correctly. So I'm just going to go ahead and tape on my aileron so it doesn't move too much as I do this. I'll just tape it on this here so it's lined up along the tip of the wing. And I'll just tape it over here as well. So now I'll just mark my location. Right there. And the other thing I'm going to do is, because if I pull this off of here real quick so you can see it, I do have this, again, this little piece in here is a little thick. And so I'm just going to go ahead and make a little notch in the aileron as well, so that kind of sits up there nice and flush. Not much, and you know you're not going to see any of this because it's going to be, the aileron is going to be flush up against it, so you really don't see this kind of stuff. But we know that it'll fit better, like so. And then I actually put a little bit of a groove in it as well so that it sits down against that rounded shapes in there. Now I just have my pin vise with a small drill bit. I know where I need to go with my mark. And I will now carefully get inside here. Boy, that's going to be very, very, almost such a thin aileron. Be very careful just to get this in here. All right, let's give it a little bit of a test run here. Test fit. There it goes. Okay, something like that right there. All right, so now we'll move on to back to our CA hinges. And I think for this, I'm just going to do, I'll do 4 of them. And probably could get away with 3, but I'll do 4. I'll do one out here toward the tip. I'll do one in here about right about there. One here, and then one in here closer to this actual connection right here. So for out here on the tip, I'm just going to mark in about 1 inch, right about there. A little dot on that one. And then I have one, probably do one right about here. Do one here. I'm picking the locations where the ribs come in, because I can kind of push, I can kind of slot into the tail end of the rib and use that to help hold on. Because remember, this is actually a very thin trailing edge back here. There's only a little teeny piece of wood back in there. There's the 2 sheets that come down, and then there's a little teeny piece of wood, if you remember when I did this. So I want to utilize the area kind of going into a rib. So right here, I'll put it right there. I can kind of see that. So I'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4 like that. Actually, I'm going to move this one to right here. And then this one, yeah, I'll leave that one right there. Well, keep making a little bit of adjustments to this. I'm actually going to bring it in closer to the aileron control link right here. I'm just going to go ahead and put it, yeah, put it about right there. I guess I was okay. About an inch away from that location there. All right, so now I have to carefully slide this in. It's always a little bit difficult to do this with obviously the multiple hinges, because you kind of got to get them all in there at one time. I have to go into this little point here, and then it's hard sometimes if they buckle, it's hard to get them in. So I'm gonna do my best to show you this. Hopefully it'll work out okay. And like I've mentioned before, this is a very thin wood. It's a thin balsa. It's kind of hard to get everything without, you're not necessarily damaging it. It's just that it's hard to get it without sort of splitting a little bit too much here and there. So I think it's okay. It's just that it's a little difficult to work with very small kind of scale like this, at least for me. Just got to be very careful. Slide these guys in. Like I said, if they buckle, then it makes it a little bit harder. Sometimes these pins get in the way. This guy's being a troublemaker right here. I think I'm going to pull the pin out of this one. It's kind of getting in the way there. Let me see here. All right, well, I think it's kind of hard to show on camera, but I think I got it where it needs to be. May make a little bit of adjustments to this, and then we'll glue it in. All right, well, I got this on here after kind of monkeying around with it a little bit, as you saw, but then I realized I made a little bit of a mistake, is I forgot to put my glue for the aileron linkage. So I'm not going to be using CA for that. I probably could use CA for that, but I'm just going to go ahead and use a little bit of epoxy again, because it's metal against the wood in there. So let me go ahead and pull this off of here, and then we will go ahead and glue it in. Just need to be careful, but I got to pull this off and reset it here. It's all right. So what happens? At least with me, sometimes I make a little mistake. Okay. And again, I'll put a little bit of petroleum jelly right here so that I don't glue this guy on here. Put a little bit around here like this. So I'll try to work a little bit of this epoxy down inside of the hole here. Be very careful. I don't want to get it, like I said, I don't want to get it everywhere. If I just kind of work it down in there a little bit with using a pin here, just kind of get it in there a little bit at a time. Like that. I'll put a little bit obviously on control horn here. I'm calling it a control horn. It kind of, obviously it's not, it's a linkage or whatever you want to call it, but. And now we'll go back and put this aileron back on here. carefully. All right, now I can get my CA glue and we'll glue this on. And like with the other one, I'm going to have to work it and kind of get it to loosen up a little bit because it is pretty stiff now that it has the glue in there, but it'll have to be worked out, but it'll be okay. All right, so this guy is on here now. You know, I ended up with probably a little bit more of a gap than I wanted right here where this kind of linkage is, just to make room for it. I kind of had it, well, I had to cut it out actually to get it to fit, so I guess it's just the way it's going to have to be. You can do yours differently if you're building this same plane, but anyhow, I think this is going to be good like this. So let me go ahead and I will do the same thing on this side, and then we'll come back and take a look at it. Okay, so I got this side finished, and like always, you know, it seems that when you do something like this where you have to work on things in multiple steps, it seems like the second time you do it, it's actually easier, which that's the way it was for me. It was easier than doing it on this other side. But anyhow, pull these guys out of here. And again, it's stiff, so it's going to have to be loosened up, but we'll work on that. I'll have to do a little bit of cleanup here. I've got a couple little spots on here from the ink when I was putting my pen marks on there. And then I'll also kind of have to go over this a little bit with the iron, because again, you know, you're sort of disturbing these areas when you're making these little slots and such and cutting things. You sort of disturb your monocoat or your covering material, so I'll have to go back over that to kind of clean it up. But overall, I think it's looking okay now. Okay, so I now have all the control surfaces hinged and have the wing mounted on here, obviously, so we can just take a look at it. So let's go ahead and flip it over here and get stuff out of the way. So of course, here's our ailerons. A little bit on the tight side, but they'll loosen up. You know, like I said, I have to just work with them a little bit. You have to just get them, loosen them up a little bit. And then back here, of course, is our elevator and our rudder. So those are now complete, which I'm happy about. And what I need to do, though, one thing I wanted to mention is that when I was putting the wing on, as I was plugging it up here in the front where the dowel is, the wires coming off of the ailerons were bumping in to the fuselage here, just basically because it goes in, you know, kind of slides in like this. Well, it couldn't get past the fuselage unless I push the ailerons sort of forward, which is fine for now because I don't have them hooked up to a servo or anything. But once the servo is hooked up to them, they're going to be sort of in the way. So what I'm going to have to do is probably just put a couple kind of shallow channels or little openings right in here, just so I can kind of get those to slide in as I put the wing on. So I'll show you that later. But in any case, I think this came out okay. It's a little bit of a tedious process. It's not the easiest thing to do at times because, again, being a small plane, it's a little bit harder to work with it because the surfaces are thin, as you saw, and it's a little bit more difficult. Larger plane, you know, you can cut away and it's stronger, so it's a little bit easier, but just have to be careful. It can be kind of delicate. Well, okay, so that's going to be about it for this video. So the next step, the next video in this build series, going to be finishing the installation of the landing gear. We'll have the main gear that we're going to finish up. I already made the the connections previously. Just going to go ahead and get those screwed down onto the front here, and then also going to be working on the tail wheel and the little tail wheel bracket here. So that'll be the next time. So again, thanks for watching my channel. I always appreciate it, and we will see you next time.